I didn't buy victuals. Son of a bitch. I'll do it when I get out of this.
Warp drive active. Docking request accepted.
settlement, no. Oh my god, design that better, you worthless piece of shit company. Settlement, no. I don't know, we keep dying, man. Now I'm 400 meters away. So fucking stupid. So fucking stupid. I can't believe you put me over the settlement over the fucking thing. Redo your UI, your piece of shit UI. Waste so much goddamn time. I wonder how many thousands of hours that steals every single day. Fucking idiot developers. Oh my god, this is just ridiculous. This is not what I came for. I don't want this. This is not what I came for. I don't want that. This toe pot. This toe pot is more entertaining than what I just went through. Sorry, it is. Like, this cat's more entertaining than what I just went through. Sorry. You and your idea of what modern multiplayer gaming is garbage. So when it gets toxic, leave. Just leave. Like I just did. Fucking leave. The minute that you're like, oh, that was toxic as hell. Nope. Bye. Oh my god. Most of the time, anything the developers do around multiplayer fails horribly, and I'm kind of sick of being around it. I'm sick of, like, putting up with it. I'd rather do it alone, I guess. As unfortunate as that is.
Warp drive active.
Incoming tell. Incoming tell. Incoming tell. Incoming tell.
I watched this Bob Marley remastered thing on Netflix last night. So good. It was good to see all them, the whalers and all this. Watch the assassination attempts by the CIA of everything that we love and know. This is pretty classic story, that. Fucking poor Bob Marley. $250 Elysium Reaper, nice bet, nice. Sucks. It's too early in the morning. These guys, I don't want to be in this raid. There's no way. I'm not doing a save with these guys. Nope. Sucks. Yeah, where am I now? Oh no! God damn it! This is so annoying. I can't seem to land. It's so annoying. Oh, I'm out of mana now. It's so stupid. Just sit. Alright, what are you doing? Are you good? Yeah, you're good. Oh, I'm full. I'm full right now. I'm full. So then go dock.
Warp drive active.
BRB.
Docking request accepted.
Oh, yeah. Tall, frosty beer. Ah. Wait, where am I now? All right. Okay, gotta go deep in the pocket, like right there. Yeah, like right there. That's perfect. Let's go see what's going on in the world today. But first, I want to up my graphics on EvE because I can. I'm gonna turn shader to high, texture to high, and all the rest of it disabled, low, low. All right. Yep. Seems good. Yep. Perfect. Then, okay. Then, okay. And then we are going back out.
Warp drive active.
Almost there. Almost made it. There it is. We made it. Fucking sweet. No XP. Which means I must
The
sneak up
asteroid
and go
is
all the way back
depleted.
west again. And we'll go somewhere else. I believe it's Valdunia, but I don't know. I think it is Valdunia. This one's busting out. These guys can stay here if they want, but I'm going to leave. Yep, we'll go to the next one.
Autopilot engaged.
Oh, wait, no, wait. Stop.
Autopilot disabled.
We'll pick up.
Warp drive active.
This is south? No, I don't want to go south. I want to go west. Like right there, yeah.
Docking request accepted.
Okay, let's take a look at how much that is. It's half a load, so we'll go get another half load somewhere else before we finish. Okay, and we'll take
Autopilot
that all
engaged.
the way. Yep, and here we are. Oh wait, no. Oh, oops. Yeah, we gotta go west. Yeah,
Warping to Stargate.
north.
Warp drive active.
West. I caught the L, but that's alright. There's what I want, right there. Yep. Okay, and
Approaching Stargate.
$1,600. God damn it, man. I don't know where I'm gonna make my money, but I think it's Castle Javal. And that sucks, but I mean, that's what I actually think. So we're gonna go there. Valdunia.
Autopilot jumping.
Fucking Valdunia. Valdunia is one of the most dangerous places, really. This place sucks. It's like full of skeletons and ghosts, and
Warping to Stargate.
elementals and things that
Warp
can
drive
just waste
active.
your ass, you know. This Lost Soul, it's EP. That's better than what I'm, you know, getting out there. And we're just gonna give up on the idea of money. Like, this Lost Soul is gonna take fucking forever, ever. Like, ever. Yeah, well, that's okay, though. I mean, whatever.
Approaching Stargate.
$101, not bad. We'll just keep going. I don't care, just kill whatever's here. Eventually I'll be 60 and I'll get LB2. And after that, like after these, after I like level out of these. How did you do? Let's go see what's going on the YouTube.
Autopilot jumping. Warping to Stargate. Warp drive active.
5 hours.
Gems or Trash series.
What? How is that possible?
I started this series as an excuse to talk about some forgotten and obscure games that I've been playing in my free time. Then I saw a ton of suggestions for different games that I could cover, and this quickly turned into a full-blown series that wouldn't be possible without you guys. Fast forward to the present day, I covered 50 different titles, which is insane if you think about it. So I wanted to conclude this year with one big video
Approaching
about all the
Stargate.
games that I covered so far, and I hope we can do the same at the end of the next year.
Oh, intriguing.
Many thanks for all the support in 2023, big shout out to my channel members, Patreons and Super Chatters. But before all of that, have you ever wondered how would it feel to be a commander of a space expedition in a Star Trek universe? Well, you don't have to wonder anymore because Star Trek Fleet Command is free to play. Star Trek Fleet Command is a 4X MMO game set in the ever-expanding Star Trek universe. The open world in this game offers you a vast and diverse space landscape, which is definitely one of my most favorite things about the game. There is a big emphasis on immersion and freedom, which allows players to engage with the world's rich lore and create unique experiences. You can customize your fleet and crew to dominate the
Autopilot
galaxy
jumping.
and experience the entire Star Trek universe with all of your favorite characters like Kirk, Spock and so on. Star Trek Fleet Command is free, and every month there are new events and content being added to the game. There is a new
Warping
feature
to
called
Stargate.
Wave Defense,
Warp
which
drive
introduces a new
active.
way for players to
continue
socially
to
interact
sink their
based on
money.
defense teams that transcend alliances. Speaking of which, there are epic battles with players all around the
Speaking
world,
of which-
brings a new dynamic and competitive edge to the game. Become a commander in the Star Trek universe now by downloading the game with my
Don't do
link in the
that.
description
Don't do
or by
that.
scanning the QR code if you're on the PC. And if you're a new player, use the promo code WARPSPEED
Don't do
to
that.
get a content pack for free. Just click on the link in the description, create Scopely account, then visit StarTrekFleetCommand.com and click on the store icon. By using the promo code
Bad game,
WARPSPEED,
stay
you will
away.
redeem your rewards, which include 10 epic shards of Kirk. Many thanks to Star Trek Fleet Command for sponsoring this video.
Oh god, if that's what this
Number
is.
5. Venetica.
I don't want it. That's what this is. I never wanted it. I never wanted it
We're
to
starting
be a
off with a
commercial.
game that
No.
was heavily requested on the channel. Venetica is an action-adventure that came out in 2009 for PC,
Approaching
Xbox 360 and PS3. It's developed and published by Deck 13, the same studio behind Surge 1 and Surge 2. Judging by the comments on my other videos, it seems like a lot of my viewers want me to cover this game with a review. So I recently tried to do a full playthrough and make a proper review about this game, but to be honest, I kinda gave up. Venetica definitely has a certain charm to it, and if you really enjoy action adventures from this time period, it might be worth playing just because of that. I played this game for just a couple of hours, so it could get a lot better later, but my first impressions were not that good. I found the gameplay really stiff and not fun at all. That was probably the main reason why I dropped the game. You play as a girl called Scarlet, who discovered that she has some unique powers, which are somehow connected with the underworld.
Undead Archon? I don't understand.
These powers allow you to resurrect upon death if you have enough Twilight energy. After your village gets attacked in the beginning, Scarlet's
Autopilot
husband gets
jumping.
killed by these assassins, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. In the beginning, your main goal is to get to the city of Venice. The map is not exactly open world, but it has some open zones that you can explore. The visual style of this game is
Warping
kinda
to
similar to
Stargate.
Fable, if you ask me.
Warp drive
Like the
active.
majority of games from this time period, Venetica overuses the blur effect, which makes the game look pretty bad in a lot of scenes. Speaking of looking bad, the game has some pretty rough looking character models, which are downright creepy at times. However, the areas you're going to explore are not looking that bad, although there are a lot of low resolution textures all around the map. I was trying to play the game on 4K, and considering how the game looks in general, I don't think my PC should have a lot of problems to handle it. But the UI doesn't scale properly on this resolution, so I just switched to Full HD. Even on Full HD, Venetica is poorly optimized and the performance of the game is not that great. Putting that aside, Venetica has an RPG progression in terms of learning new skills at trainers, looting new armors and weapons, and so on. But like I said, the combat feels very stiff and it's heavy on
Approaching
the button mashing.
Stargate.
The sound effects are pretty annoying as well.
They always do this. Shunk, shunk, shunk.
The voice
Sure.
acting is kinda solid considering that this was a lower budget game. Everyone has a strong British accent, which was to be expected because the developer is from Europe.
This discussion is over, young man. Go home now.
I hate you!
Overall, it seems like Venetica is a mediocre action adventure at best, but like I said, I just invested a couple of hours into this game. It was enough for me to quit the game, but I might try it out again in the future. Number 4, The First Templar. He's angry. The First Templar is an action adventure with co-op features released in 2011 by MMO Games. In this game you play as a Templar who is on a mission to find the Holy Grail. If you're playing alone, you will get to switch
Autopilot
between
jumping.
two different characters. The game has a bunch of puzzles and areas where you have to use both of your characters in order to progress further. Most of these puzzles are pretty simple and kinda boring if you're playing alone. The First Templar is a lot more fun if you're playing in
Warping to
co-op, and
Stargate.
it's one of the major
Warp
reasons
drive
why I decided to
active.
include it in the video. By itself, the game is not all that great. It's very obvious that this game was on a very tight budget. It looks pretty bad, even for a 2011 game, and some of the game mechanics feel outdated. I absolutely hate when you have to spam the button like crazy in order to perform some simple actions like closing a gate, for example. Putting that aside, the First Templar has a pretty simple combat system, but it's functional.
Combat system.
You can win most fights by simply button mashing. It's not very challenging, mostly because of the brain dead AI. However, you occasionally have to block or break the shield on the enemy and dodge arrows. The controls are pretty snappy at the expense of very choppy animations when you move around. I actually like this design decision because they
Approaching
prioritize the
Stargate.
feel of the gameplay over realistic animations for moving your character around. I mean, in a perfect world you should have both, but when you're on a tight budget, some sacrifices have to be made. Anyway, the combat has some pretty cool finishing animations. There is a light RPG progression system which allows you to unlock a couple of more abilities and increase the stats of your characters. For example, you can unlock the parry mechanic, but it's not very rewarding. You'll be better off with using the simple combo system by spamming the button. Even though you'll be able to find a bunch of chests on the map, the game is not very heavy on looting. Most of the time you'll be looting XP and some buffs for your character, it's kinda weird. The first Templar has a couple of armor sets and weapons that you can find, but they're just outfits, they don't provide you with any gameplay benefits. And what's kinda interesting, you can't equip
Autopilot
individual
jumping.
armor pieces until you find the full set. The boss fights are few and far between and they're not very good. Most of the time you'll be fighting a lot of enemies at once. To be honest, I'm kinda impressed with the amount of NPCs on the screen at once in some
Moving
of
to
these fights.
Stargate.
This
Warp
game is very
drive
linear,
active.
but every location has at least one optional objective that you can do. But even the characters think it's a waste of time.
Was this detour really necessary?
The first Templar is very heavy on the story and it has a bunch of cutscenes and dialogues. The writing is mediocre at best and the story itself is not all that interesting. But this game is not wasting your time. Like I said, it's very linear and it should take you around 10 hours or even less to complete it. I highly recommend playing in co-op if you want to try it out. It's not worth playing as a single player game if you ask me. Number 3. Hunted Demon's Forge. Hunted Demon's Forge is an action-adventure game with some light RPG elements. This game was developed by Exile Entertainment, the same studio which developed the Wasteland series. I was curious about this
Approaching
game ever since
Stargate.
it came out back in 2011,
But they
but I never
suck.
got a chance to try it out.
They suck.
The
They're
reception
not
for
Fallout.
Demon's Forge
Yeah.
was mediocre at best. And even though I'm not a huge fan of review scores in general, I would say they're pretty accurate in this particular case. The main selling point of this game was the local and online co-op. Unfortunately, the online co-op is no longer available. The Xbox 360 and PS3 had a split-screen co-op feature, and this is the only way to experience the co-op today. The PC version never had a split-screen feature, so you can only play the game in the single-player mode.
It's dead now.
Technically, you can still get the online co-op to work on PC by using some third-party software, but it's not worth the hustle if you ask me. As for
Fuck
the game
no.
itself,
Why
it's
would
very
you
heavy
spend
on
that
the
much
action
time
combat and very
trying to
light
play
on
this
story.
bad game?
Elara and Kadok are mercenaries,
Why?
and shortly after you begin the game,
Because you
Kadok
came up
starts
on this
seeing
bad
strange
game?
creatures
Let
from
it
his
go.
dreams.
Wait,
Let it go.
this is your dream girl?
This is the
Yeah,
game you first
she's from
played.
his dreams as
I'm
well.
sorry.
Moving
Let it
to
go.
Stargate.
Anyway, Elara decides to be a
drive
dumbass
active.
and she touches the dead stone and blah blah blah. You start fighting some skeletons after that. It's a pretty simple story with mediocre writing at best, but it's good enough for a game that's focusing so much on the combats. I was pleasantly surprised with the action combat in this game. Even though it's definitely a bit outdated in some areas, it's very fun to kill stuff. Kadok is focused on melee skills, while Elara is the master of the bow. This action combat is leaning towards hack and slash style, but it's not a mindless button mash. It has some features that you would expect to find in third-person shooters from that time period, like the cover system. Kadok and Elara have a couple of different skills that you can unlock, and most of the time you'll be fighting more than a couple of enemies on the screen. For example, Elara has a frost arrow which freezes enemies, and you can easily finish them off with normal melee attacks or regular arrows. You can do headshots which are very satisfying, and Kadok has some nice warrior skills. Besides the combat, the game has some
Approaching
puzzles that you
Stargate.
have to solve, which usually
Combat.
requires some minimal effort. I think the puzzles were kinda unnecessary in this game, and they just slowed down the progression for no apparent
In
reason.
most games.
I recently made a review about Darksiders 2, which was another action
Which is
adventure
another
that came out
terrible
around
game.
the same time period. That game did an amazing job with the puzzles. However,
No,
in
it
Demon's
didn't.
Forge,
No,
the
it
puzzles
didn't.
feel kinda forced, very slow and outdated.
No, it did not. You're lying. Don't lie to them. Because the chances of them ever doing Darksiders 2 puzzles is like kind of low. I get that you're
Overall,
lying
if
to
you're
them,
looking for a
but you're
decent
lying to
action
them. Do
adventure
not
with
play
more features and
Darksiders
consoles,
2.
You can
Don't
have
do
some
it.
fun with this game. I'm not sure about backwards
Darksiders 2
compatibility on Xbox
sucks.
Series X and S, but you can get the game on PS5 if you have the premium membership
Autopilot
which allows you to play
PS5
PS3
Hunted
games.
the Demon's
If you don't care about
Forge.
co-op,
Oh,
it works
no.
fine in single player on PC as well.
At least it plays. It's an okay game, I guess. At least it plays.
Number 2,
Moving to Stargate.
Rune 2.
Warp drive active.
Too.
Rune 2 is an action RPG released in 2019. Apparently these guys tried to sue Bethesda for intentionally sabotaging the game in favor of Skyrim. Lol. Yeah, anyway, Rune 2 is pretty rough around the edges, to put it lightly. However, I believe it had more than a couple of very fun mechanics, and the fun factor in general could be very high if you're ready to ignore some major issues. Rune 2 looks like a 2003 game and not a good looking 2003 game. What's even worse, it runs like crap, it's highly unoptimized regardless of the graphical setting. This game is going to feel very familiar if you played Valheim. Come to think of it, Rune 2 had the potential to be equally famous like Valheim before Valheim. It essentially had very similar mechanics and the gameplay
Approaching
itself feels
Stargate.
very similar. I would even argue that the combat in Rune 2 is better than Valheim. It has a mutilation system which makes it feel
Yep.
pretty brutal.
Combat at Valheim sucked. That's why I don't go back to it.
First of all, you start by making your Viking with some very limited character customization options. As you can see here, the game had the option for co-op play, but Rune 2 servers are dead for quite some time now. You start the game in Midheim and Heimdall is the narrator and your tutorial guy. You immediately get to try out some combat mechanics and then you start doing some very
Combat
straightforward quests.
mechanics.
Not long after the beginning of the game, you start learning about some other mechanics like building things, cutting down trees and gathering resources. Unlike Valheim, the map in this game is not
Autopilot
randomly generated.
jumping.
You have a home base that you have to defend from frequent attacks and repair the buildings you
Autopilot
need.
disabled.
These buildings give you
Waypoint
different
reached.
gameplay benefits and the game is heavily focused on gathering materials. You can craft gear, learn new skills when you level up, and as far as I could tell, the main quest is usually very simple. Just a bunch of kill quests basically. The UI is pretty bad and kinda confusing, but it's functional and learning new skills is kinda fun. Shortly after the beginning, you get to learn a unique skill by aligning to a certain god of your choice. The zones on the map are leveled, and the game is pretty challenging if you try to kill someone that's much higher level than you. Speaking about that, the combat is pretty fun like I said before. It's not amazing by any means, but I wouldn't call it bad. You have a couple of different melee attacks, a dodge, parry, and different skills to learn. The itemization
Looks
in this
okay to
game
me,
uses a
honestly.
pretty standard RPG philosophy. Items have different quality levels and bunch of different stats. Rune 2 feels like a Diablo-like game in terms of loot. I think it's randomized for the most part. I think they managed to do a good job when it comes to looting things because it feels satisfying. Well, in the early game at least. Unfortunately, this game is delisted on Steam and Epic Store as well. You could say it's completely dead, but there are still some other methods to get it if you really want to try it out, if you know what I mean. It's a shame because this game would have been really fun to play, especially in co-op. Valheim came not long after this game released and it managed to be extremely successful with a very similar game design formula. Number 1. Blades of Time. Blades of Time is a hack-and-slash action-adventure released in 2012 for PC, PS3 and Xbox 360. It was also released on Nintendo Switch a few years ago, but unfortunately, that port seems to have a lot of problems. However, the PC version is almost flawless. I managed to play it on 4K with the highest details, and the frame rate was pretty much locked on 120. Blades of Time is definitely an underrated game, if you ask me. First
Blades
of all,
of
it
Time.
looks pretty damn good, despite the low resolution textures on many of the world assets. But the main reason for looking this good is obviously hair physics. Yeah, anyway, even though Blades of Time has a pretty weak story and very generic main character, it's worth playing this game for the gameplay itself. You play as a treasure hunter called Ayumi, who ends up on this magical island. Your main goal is to reunite with your partner, but in the meantime, you discover the true magic of this island and you gain magical powers. Some characters are kinda interesting, but the story is really not that great. So let's talk about the gameplay. Blades of Time has a unique time rewinding mechanic that might seem like just a gimmick at first, but it turns out to be much more than that. When I first learned about this, I assumed it's just a mechanic that you use when you make a mistake, like in Prince of Persia for example, but it's actually a lot different than that. Rewinding time in this game allows you to see what happened in the past 15 seconds or so, but this mechanic also creates a copy of yourself. So for example, if you're in the middle of the fight, if you rewind the time for just a couple of seconds, it allows you to attack the enemy with your clone and essentially change the past. It's a lot simpler than it sounds. A lot of enemies will require you to use this mechanic because that will be the only way to kill them. Even the bosses utilize this mechanic in a very interesting way. For example, this enemy has a special shield which can only be broken with a very fast gunfire. So you have to shoot it a couple of times and rewind the time so you can shoot it with your clone at the same time. You can rewind the time a couple of times in a row and create multiple copies of yourself. But of course, this wouldn't matter a lot if the action gameplay was not good in general. Blades of Time has a fast-paced action combat that relies on different combos and spells. As you progress through the game, you will unlock more attacks and spells, which you can execute with different button combinations. These spells feel really impactful, which gives the combat a decent amount of weight. The flow of the combat is just amazing, and the game feels pretty balanced. You absolutely need to learn how to take the advantage of your combos and spells, otherwise the enemies can easily kill you in just a couple of hits. The character progression as well as the story is pretty linear. You don't have a lot of wiggle room while exploring these maps, but there are secrets to find by using your compass. Other than that, the level design is quite linear, but you'll need to use the same time mechanic to solve puzzles and do some platforming. The puzzles are okay, but the platforming is not exactly amazing. Even though the controls are pretty snappy in this game, controlling a Yumi can feel a bit floaty and janky sometimes. That's not so good when the game requires precision while double jumping and dashing. To sum it up, I highly recommend playing this game because it's definitely a hidden gem. I might do a dedicated video about Blades of Time just because I like it a lot. I recently did a video about some obscure and forgotten action RPGs and action adventures, and people seem to like that video a lot. I already had some plans to make more similar videos because there are a lot more games I wish to revisit. The majority of those games are not so well known and they seem to be a great fit for these videos. So without further ado, these are 5 more obscure and forgotten games that I recently played. Number 5. Demonicon. Demonicon is an action RPG released in 2013 for PC, PS3 and Xbox 360. I started playing Demonicon shortly after I made the first... Number 4. Loki. Loki is a Diablo-like action RPG that came out in 2007 for Microsoft Windows. Around the same time period I was playing Titan Quest a lot, another Diablo-like action RPG that came out in 2006. When I got bored of Titan Quest after God knows how many hours, I eventually started looking for a new similar game. Number 1. Drakensag The Dark Eye.
No! Friend, never tell
Drakensag The Dark Eye is an RPG from 2008, developed by a German studio called Redden Labs. It's definitely a game that went under the radar, and after playing it for the first time ever, I would even say that it's a real hidden gem.
Good day. What'll it be?
It reminds me a lot of Dragon Age Origins, and if you're a fan of that game, I would seriously recommend trying out Drakensang. For some reason, I was convinced that Dragon Age Origins came out before this game, but that's not true. Drakensang came out a whole year before Dragon Age Origins. I discovered this game a long time before, shortly after I played Dragon Age Origins, but for whatever the reason, I never played it. So it was a perfect time to go back and finally try it out, and I'm really glad I did. This game obviously didn't have nowhere near the budget of Dragon Age Origins, and you can easily tell that when it comes to some features. However, this game still has a lot to offer.
It's an interesting question, one that I've had plenty of time to think about.
First of all, it's very slow paced, like very slow paced. This will probably be a major turn off for some people, but if you love CRPGs, you probably won't have a lot of issues with that. Although most modern CRPGs with real-time combat usually have an option to speed up the gameplay. Anyway, Drakensag is based on the pen and paper role-playing rules of The Dark Eye. That's the most popular pen and paper role-playing game from Germany, which had very limited international success. Long story short, you shouldn't have a lot of issues with how the game works if you played games like Neverwinter Nights, Baldur's Gate or Dragon Age Origins. The story of Drakensang starts off really simple. You get a letter from a friend called Ardo, who lives in the city of Erdok.
I am turning to you in what are now dark times.
Ardo is asking you for assistance, but in order to get to Ferdak, you first need some letters of recommendation. You start the game in a place called Avestro, and this is basically your tutorial area. You'll find a couple of simple quests here, and you should learn how some mechanics work. It might be a bit overwhelming if you never played a similar game before, but you'll be fine. Shortly after, you will arrive in the city of Ferdak, where the main quest opens up. It turns out your buddy Ardo was killed, and your quest is to find out who did it. It's a very lengthy investigation, and the game continues to build up the story after it. Drakensang doesn't give you a lot of options when it comes to the story. You won't get to make important decisions. However, the dialogue itself is pretty decent, and I really like how it's presented. You get this zoomed in perspective with the character speaking on the sides, even though this is showcasing the age of the game with some low resolution textures in the characters. But I was pleasantly surprised with the number of different looking character models. If you watch my reviews about games from this time period, I usually ramble about the character models and how many clones there are in the game. It's not like Drakensang doesn't have any clones, but important characters in the game usually have unique looking models. It's definitely worth some praise, especially because this game didn't have a big budget. When it comes to the gameplay, it's almost exactly what you would expect from a CRPG. You get to make and customize your own character with an impressive amount of different classes to choose. This is a party-based RPG, you'll be able to have up to 6 characters in your party. Unfortunately, these characters are not all that interesting from the story perspective. They do have some banter here and there, and some different comments about certain situations, but that's pretty much it.
Are the merchants allowed to block any road they feel like?
As for the gameplay, you have a tactical pause and you get to issue commands to all of your followers. Like I said, the gameplay is very slow, so you always have more than enough time to figure out what you're going to do in combat. It starts off kind of challenging, but as you progress through the game and when you figure out how things work, it becomes pretty easy. I think the biggest issue with the combat is the lack of meaningful boss fights and enemy variety in general. It gets very easy after a certain point, but I still found it enjoyable. I think it's a very chill RPG to play. It was a relaxing experience. When it comes to the game world, this should also be familiar if you played similar games. The world map starts unlocking new areas after you finish a certain quest, and there are about 6 or 7 different locations that you'll get to explore. The main city of Ferdak is the only location that you're going to visit frequently, while other locations will be permanently locked when you're done with them. At first, I thought I'm not going to like the game world that much, since the first location has a yellow and brownish color palette that I'm not a huge fan of. It basically looks like a bad Instagram filter. But as you unlock new areas, you'll find out that the game has a decent visual variety. I mean, sure, many assets have very low-res textures, but the atmosphere which the game creates is still pretty good. Overall, it's a pleasant game for the eyes. Drakensang the Dark Eye is a very chill game to play, and I recommend checking it out if you can handle those issues I mentioned. Sure, it has some underwhelming features, but I still think it's worth playing. You can easily get 30 plus hours from it.
Your skill has increased.
Drink blood, my sword!
I'll have GOG links for some of these games, so if you decide to buy them, you'll support my channel by using those links. Well, another episode of Forgotten and Obscure RPGs and Action Adventures.
Good luck.
If this is your first time watching and you don't have a clue what I'm talking about, this is a series of videos where I try to find some interesting and, as the title suggests, forgotten RPGs/action adventures. You guys have been extremely helpful with all the suggestions for games that I could cover in these videos. I already had a very big list of games that I want to cover, but you made it like 5 times bigger, and I'm seeing new suggestions every day. If you haven't watched any of my previous videos in the series, you are more than welcome to check them out. But of course, there is nothing wrong if you want to start with this one.
Enough, I'm not here for sex.
Anyway, I think you get the picture, so let's get straight into it, shall we? Number 5. Game of Thrones.
I'm leaving for King's Landing in order to request an audience with the Queen.
The first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the name Game of Thrones, well, that could be a lot of things, but I'm pretty sure words like forgotten or obscured is the last thing you would think of. However, this game had a very quiet release back in 2012. Maybe it's because the game was developed by a not so well-known studio with almost no marketing budget. Even so, I think there should be a lot more interest for a Game of Thrones RPG. Although I need to remind you that this was in early 2012, so Game of
where
Thrones
they
was
didn't
not
know
exactly
shit
at its
about
peak,
that.
but still,
Yeah,
it
they
was
didn't
pretty
know
popular
anything
back
about it.
then. Whatever the case might
That shit hadn't happened, yeah.
be, for the underwhelming interest in this game, Cyanide Studio released a Game of Thrones RPG that nobody played.
A one-on-one will be enough to satisfy me.
I remember the first time I heard about this game from a gaming magazine I used to read back in the day. It was kinda fun collecting these things, and yeah, I'm a boomer, shut the hell up. Anyway, Cyanide Studios got the rights for this IP, and they actually got George R.R. Martin himself to be a consultant on the game's script. So I guess it's not a coincidence that the only redeeming factor of this game is the story itself.
What can I do for you, handsome?
Unfortunately, even the story itself won't give you a lot of reasons to consider playing this game unless you're a huge fan of Game of Thrones IP. The lack of budget was very obvious, which heavily affected the quality of the presentation. The underwhelming presentation makes the story a lot worse than it should be.
My lot kept out of it from the start.
I don't give a damn. You've been a pain in our asses for far too long.
Speaking about the story, you get to play as two different characters, Morse Westford and Alistair Sarwick. This game is divided by chapters, and at first you get to switch between these characters whenever the chapter is done. But as the story progresses, you get to control both of them at the same time. They're actually close friends. The story starts with Morse chasing down a deserter from the Night's Watch. After this cutscene, the game allows you to control Morse in a couple of different ways. Game of Thrones doesn't have a character customization because you get to play with these two well-established characters. However, you can choose different playstyles, improve their skills and stats, and acquire new gear. But the gameplay leaves a lot to be desired, to say the least. Game of Thrones plays like a CRPG with real-time pause from the third-person perspective. What has to be my biggest gripe with the gameplay is the party members, or the lack of them. A lot of chapters only allow you to control Morse or Alistair, which makes the combat encounters extremely boring. It feels like a streamlined CRPG with very slow-paced combat. Maybe it looks similar to games such as Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights or Pillars of Eternity, but it's far from that, trust me. Don't let this game fool you, this is not exactly a party-based CRPG. Well, not in a traditional way at least, you only get to control two characters at once, and even that only happens in certain chapters. There are a lot of chapters in the game where you only get to control one of these characters, which makes the combat even worse. CRPGs with real-time combat and tactical pause should strive to be just that, tactical. If you ask me, the whole appeal to that combat system is how you choose to approach different combat situations and how you build your characters in the party. They usually allow you to micromanage every move your character takes, if you desire, with an insane amount of customization for each character. Game of Thrones has some of that, but it feels very clumsy and not fun at all. Even the weapon hits feels like they lag for some reason. Some abilities can be fun to use, and you have to learn the simple rules of this combat system if you don't want to die. You have to use an appropriate weapon against different armor types, otherwise you'll deal miserable damage even on normal difficulty. Fundamentally, this is a nice little feature that could have been way more interesting if the combat itself was any better. Come to think of it, this game kinda reminds me of Witcher 1 in a way. It has a really good story, with pretty bad gameplay and mediocre presentation at best. Although Witcher 1 managed to create an amazing atmosphere, and I can't say the same about this game.
That's Alistair Sarwick, one of Chataya's old lovers.
Oh, intriguing. Do you think we can...
Of course, if he wants it. But someone has to do it with him.
Actually, I take that back. This game looked very outdated even when it came out in 2012, let alone today, and the environments you're going to explore look extremely generic. Not to mention the horrible character models and low resolution textures. Even on 4K resolution the game looks pretty bad, and I couldn't get steady 60 FPS. If you can get past those issues, you could enjoy the story for what it is, but I would only recommend this game to big Game of Thrones fans. You'll get to meet a couple of well-known faces from the TV show, by the way. If you don't care for that, avoid this game like a plague.
River Spring will soon.
I don't care for that. I don't care for Game of Thrones.
Number 4. Sacred 3.
Oh god. That was so bad.
If If you're watching other videos on my channel, you probably know that I recently made a review about this game. You're more than welcome to check it out, but I will give you a shorter version of that video and I'll use some of the same clips as well. Sacred Tree basically destroyed a unique Diablo-like franchise because it went in a totally different direction. Everything that was established in previous games was scrapped, and this game had a different developer. It has very light RPG elements and almost non-existent character progression and customization. That wouldn't be so bad on the fundamental level, but previous games were really strong when it comes to those features. I don't know who thought it would be a good idea to completely disregard everything which made Sacred games, well, sacred. Sacred Tree is more of a brawler / action adventure than anything else. So is it a good brawler? It's actually pretty decent, especially if you take in consideration the co-op play. First of all, Sacred games always had a very goofy and kind of funny story and dialogue.
I was able to accomplish a small wonder today. I managed to make the air smelly out of nothing.
The story and dialogue in Sacred Tree, on the other hand, were written by a bunch of monkeys with a laptop.
I've met the gods. The gods made me. He's no god.
Face it, you don't have the power to defeat my flagship, Gloria.
Why is he calling me Gloria? Oh, never mind.
Listen, I don't care that much about the story in these kinds of games, and neither should you. It's all about the hack and slash gameplay. For some reason they thought it was a good idea to have a narrator who just won't shut the hell up.
Out of the lava, into the traps. Whoa! Who's raining bombs on our parade? There, that elite. Go on, use those explodey guys on the flagship. Oh, I suppose I don't need to whisper. Only you can hear me.
Only you can. Shut up!
Turning these wheels is literally the only interactable mechanic you have to do in these levels, but the game thinks you're a monkey who won't figure it out. Not once, not twice, but 6 times. Some levels even make you do this a couple of times, which is just... I don't know, man. Whoever designed this should take a deep look at the mirror. An area just won't stop reminding you about the damn wheel if you don't turn it right away. Oh, and by the way, Area is the name of the narrator, but who fucking cares about her name? I almost quit the game because of this.
That's the wheel that'll free our people. Clear. Now make your way to the wheel that unlocks the cells. Hello, hello. My name is Wheel. I'm getting lonely. Turn the wheel and the miners are free. Turn the wheel first, fight baddies second. Please hit the wheel. That soldier won't last long. Come on, split the flippin' wheel.
Are you out of your mind?
On a more positive note, this game looks amazing in 4K resolution and I had no issues to run it with locked 60 FPS. The game is very pleasant for the eyes. I love the art style and colors in general. Sacred Tree has an amazing visual variety in all levels. This aspect of the game deserves all the praise. Except the playable characters, I guess, who kinda look generic for the most part. I mean, Sacred 2 wasn't exactly amazing when it comes to this as well, but I think it did a slightly better job. So what about the gameplay? Well, the action combat is pretty solid. It doesn't have a lot of depth, but the hack and slash action is very fun. I beat the whole game with the Barbarian in single player, then I started playing local co-op with my girlfriend with a ranged character. The Barbarian has a couple of different skills you can unlock, as well as a couple of weapons. The skills are definitely different, but the weapons don't mean that much, they feel the same, and the stats don't seem to do anything. The combat feels exactly the same from the beginning to the very end, when it comes to character progression. Your character can only have 2 skills at the same time, and the game has a couple of more important combat mechanics. One of them is the bash, which is absolutely necessary in most fights. You use it to interrupt enemies' cast, and you can use it in melee and range modes. There is a slight chance that you'll knock down the enemy with bash and some other abilities. This opens up the chance to use the execute mechanic, which works pretty good and it's fun to use. When you manage to sync your abilities with execute, you're like a bowling ball on the screen. The gameplay is the best in those moments. The biggest problem with the gameplay in general is the wheel I mentioned before. The game overuses this feature on every level, even more than once sometimes. You'll need to turn these damn wheels 6 times in a row every time, and each time there is a wave of enemies. That might sound stupid, because it is, but the combat makes up for it, I guess. It's a very streamlined action combat system with only 2 skills, but it's fun. Well, 3 skills actually. You get a special skill you can use every now and then. I would even recommend buying this game, especially if you have someone to play it with in co-op. If you don't hold a grudge against this game because it ruined the Sacred franchise, you could have a lot of fun. But please, consider turning off the voice volume, like completely.
We are under alert! I'd like to be under something else, if you know what I mean.
The Dark Core itself lies inside the keep.
I'd like to go deep inside your keep. I don't really mean keep.
Number 3. Dungeon Lords. Dungeon Lords is an old-school action RPG, originally released in 2005, and then again in 2006, 2012, and 2015, which is the only available version nowadays on Steam. Apparently the first time it got re-released in 2006 is because the game came out in an unfinished state, and many features were left out from the original release in an effort to meet the release date. Yeah, that sounds familiar. That doesn't exactly justify all of the re-releases, but who cares about that? Let's talk about the game.
Look in the face of an ogre! You idiot! Run for your lives! The troll is loose!
If you don't care about the obvious outdated graphics and some other slightly annoying outdated features, you can have a ton of fun with this game. At least I did. The majority of features have an old-school design philosophy, which you might find interesting and fun, especially if you got bored of modern action RPGs. First of all, this game looks very similar to World of Warcraft. Actually, to be completely honest with you, it looks worse compared to vanilla WoW, but even so, Dungeon Lords manages to create a nice atmosphere in the game. Like I said, it's very outdated by today's standards, but I think there is a lot to like about this game. The comparisons with WoW don't stop with the visuals. For example, the inventory system is almost a carbon copy of vanilla WoW, and it functions the same as well. Putting that aside, the game has an action combat system with many different abilities and enemies to fight, big open worlds, different factions to join, interesting level design, and good character customization. The character creation is very basic, but the customization you get with different classes is very good. The open world is completely covered in fog of war. The in-game map is not all that helpful. You have to discover everything by yourself, which makes the exploration very enjoyable in a way, but also really frustrating sometimes when you're trying to find something specific on the map. The dungeon crawling aspect is very good, mostly because of the level design. Dungeons have multiple interconnected floors, puzzles, secrets, and even mimics. Yeah, Dark Souls didn't invent those things, by the way. The only problem is, a lot of assets in the game look the same, which can be very confusing sometimes. These levels usually require you to explore the full area, find keys for locked doors in order to proceed, or do a specific quest. For example, you discover the first city Fargo early in the game, and you can only get in by using the complex sewer system. Once you get in, you can only leave after you do a couple of specific quests. Speaking of quests, this game doesn't have any quest markers or pointers, you have to discover everything by yourself. You only get some basic instructions and that's it. When it comes to the story, the intro cutscene tells you about Lord Davenmore and his enemy, Lord Barogrim. They both have powerful wizard allies, and one of them was recently slain, which gave the advantage to Lord Barogrim. Davenmore's daughter escaped because she didn't want to get married, and you begin the game by searching for her. To be honest with you, I didn't really care that much about the story in this game. The dialogue system reminds me a lot of Morrowind. There is a ton of dialogue to read. A very small percentage of dialogue is voice acted, with some pretty bad voice acting.
The star crystal bequeathed you by Sir Augustus is very rare and possesses the power of life itself. He might have used his power to save his own life, but his destiny was to sacrifice himself that this power should be yours.
The action combat is pretty decent. You have a lot of options to build and play your character. Most of the time you'll be fighting a large group of enemies, and depending on your class, you'll have different spells and weapons to take them down. You have the option to choose your race and the class when you're making a character, but as you play the game, you will unlock a couple of more classes to mix with your original choice of class. Different classes can wield different weapon types and learn unique spells. The itemization is very satisfying in this game. You'll find weapons with unique skills. For example, you get the quest to kill a powerful vampire in the first city. The vampire can stun lock you, which is very annoying, but that's because of the dagger she's using. When you kill her, you can get this very good dagger with the same effects. She also drops a good necklace, which allows you to summon the same annoying bats that she used in fight against you. There is no level scaling in this game, so the enemies you're going to fight all have fixed levels. That's what I usually prefer in RPGs, but this game has random enemy encounters, which can be very annoying if you leave this slider to default. I recommend putting this to low if you want to try this game out. You will learn a lot of spells regardless of your class choice, and when you get to combine them in combat, it becomes really satisfying to mow down a bunch of enemies. Enemies can be very mindless, but some of them require you to use your brain a little bit. The combat can feel a bit too button mashy and repetitive, but most of the time it feels like a solid hack and slash combat. The RPG features are pretty strong, which makes the combat a lot more fun than it might look. And when you think about it, the whole game can be described just like that. It's a lot more fun than it might look, and I highly recommend playing it if you don't mind the outdated visuals. Number 2. Heavenly Sword.
With every age that comes to pass, there is one born to greatness, sent from heaven to divine. I am the one. So where's the sword?
Heavenly Sword was a PS3 exclusive which came out in 2007. I never heard about this game before until I saw it on the PS5 store. You can play this game on your PS5 only if you have the premium subscription. That's exactly how I started playing it, but I quickly dropped it because it works like a damn slideshow. So I decided to run it on PC with the emulator, and I lost about 5 to 6 hours trying to set it up properly. And even then I had a lot of crashes, which made the whole playthrough very annoying. There is a lot to love about this game, and quite a few things to hate. First of all, the characters in Heavenly Sword are very bizarre and disgusting, but surprisingly interesting.
Daddy! Bastard son.
I was blown away with the quality of lip sync and the general visual quality of character models in this 2007 PS3 game. It's not just about the cinematic cutscenes, which are great by the way. There are in-game cutscenes which are equally impressive in terms of facial animations and the presentation in general.
My men will cut into shreds out there. Now I can shower my attentions on you, and only you.
You play as a character named Nariko, and you have to protect this sword by all means from the evil King Bohan and his minions. Nariko has a little sister, who is pretty weird by the way. She's a good character though, and you will play some missions in the game with her. Their father is also one of the main characters in the game. Heavenly Sword has some cookie cutter bad guys, but all of them are well acted with some very good voice acting. Some of them have very annoying voice acting, but that was the whole point of this character, I guess.
Of course, the right price. Sire.
Like I said, there's some very bizarre things going on with these characters. I mean, just take a look at this, please.
What have I told you about calling me that word? It's bad enough seeing you blot out the sun each day without being reminded that you sprang from my youthful and exuberant loins. Sorry, Daddy.
On the other hand, this is exactly what makes the story more interesting, if you ask me. All of these characters have over-the-top evil bad guy performance, but I think it's entertaining. As for the gameplay, my first impressions of it were not that good. This was partly because of the very bad frame rate on PS3, but still, the combat felt really stiff to me. You can't rotate the camera like in a traditional third-person game, you can only pan it to the side with shoulder buttons, which is pretty useless. This makes controlling your character more annoying than it should be, but the combat moves are snappy and responsive. You have a dodge button that you have to use frequently, but for some reason they thought it was a good idea to map it on the right stick. Heavenly Sword is a hack and slash action game that kinda tries to be God of War when it comes to some features, but it's nowhere near as smooth as older God of War games. As you progress through the game, it becomes a lot better and pretty enjoyable when you get the hang of it. I just think it starts off really rough. The Heavenly Sword is your main weapon and it gives you a couple of different fighting styles. The game does a decent job with introducing you to the core mechanics of the combat. You have 3 styles of fighting with a sword and you'll have to use them all in certain situations, either for attacking or blocking the attack. All of that is well presented to the player with different colors of enemy attacks. All boss fights also rely on this mechanic as well. The combat animations are pretty good, and when you get used to the controls, it becomes very enjoyable to kill a bunch of enemies. Even though the enemy AI can be brain dead, and most of them are just standing there, waiting for their turn to fight you, like in old kung fu movies. Speaking of bunch of enemies, this game was really ambitious with the number of enemies they tried to put on the screen. You will usually see dozens or even hundreds of enemies on the screen at once. Most of these set pieces are not scripted, these are actual character models being rendered in real time. It's really impressive stuff until you realize they tried to put this on the poor PS3, which really struggles to keep that target at 30 FPS. Unfortunately, even the emulation on PC has a lot of performance issues, at least on my PC. The performance is way better in general compared to PS3, and I got 40 to 60 FPS in some cases, but there are a lot of situations where the FPS drops in low 20s. This game really needs a remaster or a remake, and I think it deserves one. Heavenly Sword came out shortly after PS3 released, so naturally it tried to include some shiny new features. Some levels require you to use gyro controls to solve puzzles or even fight a bunch of enemies. Nariko is not the only playable character in the game, you will switch to Kai in some situations. Kai only has a crossbow and some levels are entirely based around stopping and shooting. You will have to guide some of your arrows with gyro controls, which felt pretty hard at first, but after a while I got used to it and I almost never missed a shot. However, some of the worst levels in the game are designed for Kai. This is hands down the worst level in the game. The objective is to protect your father while he walks at the slowest speed I ever saw an NPC walk in a game. To make things even worse, even a single attack will kill him and you have to spam the arrows and kill all the enemies. It's extremely frustrating and I almost quit the game because of this. Speaking of stupid features, the game is plagued with quick time events, even in crucial moments in boss fights. I know that 2007 was just the beginning of this terrible trend in gaming, but that doesn't make it less annoying. To make these sections even worse, you can somehow easily fail QTEs if you don't press it when the game wants you to. It's very stupid, and it heals the boss entirely if you screw it up. Yeah, sounds fun, right? The boss fights are okay in general. There are just a handful of them though, and the game repeats some of the fights as well. Well, a single fight actually. It will take you around 5 to 6 hours to complete it, which feels just right in this particular case. Overall, I would recommend playing this game if you can bother with emulation on PC. And if you already have the Ultra subscription on PS5, you should check it out as well. But if not, I definitely would not recommend buying it just to play this game.
Let's start again. Try to get to know each other a little bit better. Hey, I mean, you're actually quite pretty, you know, and I think life's all about having fun. What do you say? Hey.
I'm going to kill you. And I'm going to kill that walking flesh-bagged son of yours.
How very interesting.
Number 1. 7. The Days Long Gone. Seven: The Days Long Gone is a unique action RPG from 2017. I can tell you straight away that this is a very underrated RPG and a real hidden gem. I'm a huge fan of isometric action RPGs and I played a lot of them, but I never experienced a game like 7 before. Is it a perfect game with no issues? Of course not, and I have more than a couple of things I want to complain about. Surprise, surprise. 7 is set in a distant cyberpunk future. I'm personally not a huge fan of cyberpunk settings in games, but I quickly fell in love with this game regardless. Not exactly because of the story and the setting, even though I think the story is pretty decent. The dialogue is well written and the voice acting is good.
Please tell me somebody pointed you to me because you know where Mayor Hutton is.
I don't know. Is he missing or something?
Sheriff Whittaker's the name. I'm the law in this town. Our cowardly mayor's gone too far this time.
The cutscenes try to depict this world as very dark and grim, while the game itself is not exactly following that philosophy. There is definitely a slight disparity between the cutscenes and the game itself, but overall I think the story is decent and you have a couple of ways to finish the game. The lack of memorable characters might be my biggest problem with the story. When it comes to graphics, 7 looks absolutely amazing, especially in 4K. Unfortunately, I had to drop my resolution on PC to Full HD because I just couldn't get steady 60 FPS on 4K. This is not exactly the game's fault. My PC is pretty average for today's standards, and I can usually only run older games in 4K resolution. The game runs on max settings.
But you have 100,000 followers. That doesn't fucking compute. That doesn't compute. It doesn't compute. Do you understand the phrase I'm saying? That does not compute with, you know, that does not compute. That does not compute. My computer's not that good. Yeah, with 100,000 followers? Why? Why? Isn't that like goddamn 20 grand a year or something like that? Why isn't your computer good?
Full HD on this PC, so take that as a...
Did you really have to spend that? Yeah, that's like 20 grand a year, I think, or something like that. Like, buy a computer, the first thing you do is whatever's making you the money, like the games, buy a computer.
Frame of reference, if you want to get the
Sometimes I wonder if these guys are that smart.
Game on PC. If not, you can also get it on current gen consoles as well, and I might pick it up on my PS5 just because of that 4K resolution.
Docking request accepted.
The visuals in this game remind me of Borderlands in a way, probably because of the cel-shaded cartoony art style. I was blown away more than a couple of times with the impressive distant terrain and the insane verticality of this open world map, but we'll get to that soon. You play as Tyrael, a master thief who ends up on an isolated prison island called Pech. Tyrael got possessed by a demon and he will be your guide for the whole game. They usually have a fun back and forth dialogue.
Of course not. Why do you assume we are to blame for all the ill in the world?
I don't know. Perhaps it's the fact that you possessed me and brought me to this shithole.
The island of Pech has a couple of big rules. You have to acquire different visas in order to explore major populated areas without being attacked by the guards. You'll mostly explore this open world by foot, but there is a fast travel system which needs to be unlocked at specific points of the map. The exploration is stellar in this game. The open world in 7 has phenomenal verticality, which wouldn't be that impressive on its own. What makes it amazing is the great parkour system, which allows you to seamlessly climb and jump all around the map. It's almost like you're playing an isometric Assassin's Creed game. This also means that most of your deaths will probably be because of the physics, because you will make wrong steps. However, I think 7 controls pretty good when it comes to exploration. The combat, on the other hand, is not amazing in terms of controls. It's not bad, but I never feel like I'm in a total control of my character's movement. That's because every attack is moving your character forwards, and I almost never like when games are doing this. The combat itself is pretty decent. There is no leveling in this game. Instead, you'll be able to find different chips with modules, which allows you to acquire new passive and active abilities. Tyrael is a master thief, so the game gives you a lot of stealth gadgets, but you don't have to focus on this playstyle. You can go in guns blazing or swords blazing, although there will be a lot of situations where that approach is a lot harder. Stealth approach is definitely more desirable in general. Like I said, there are no levels, but it's easy to tell what enemy is tougher than others by using this scan ability. And of course, by using common sense. I mean, if you see an NPC in a badass armor, he's probably tough. The equipment plays a big role in this game, although I think they kinda dropped the ball with armors and weapons. There is a nice crafting system that you should use, but it's not good enough to justify the poor quantity of weapons and armors. Speaking of armors, right from the beginning I killed one of the guards and took his armor, but when you get close to other guards, they will attack you after a couple of seconds. I thought that's pretty cool. I think this game would be 10 times better if it had traditional action RPG looting system with items of different quality. But on the other hand, it will probably make the stealth a bit worse or a lot easier. It's really fun to sneak around and steal stuff, assassinate or knock down enemies, and even all the minigames are pretty good. I know I had a lot of praise for the open world and its verticality, but sometimes this is exactly what can make the gameplay more annoying than it should be. The transparency of objects can be very confusing, especially when you're in a building with multiple floors, which happens more than often in this game. It can get in the way a lot, and I find it extremely
Video was
disorienting
good.
sometimes.
Like,
I also
really
don't
genuinely
like the fact
good.
that the camera is
Yeah.
moving with your character. I would always prefer a static camera in this perspective, but all of those problems were not enough to ruin my experience with this game.
If you have any more advice, please give it to yourself.
If you're a fan of open worlds, isometric RPGs, cyberpunk settings or stealth action gameplay, you should definitely check this game out. I think it's a real hidden gem. Tell me what game looks the most interesting to you, and why. Have you even heard about any of them, and maybe even played them? Leave a comment down below. I'll have GOG links for some of these games if you want to buy them on the platform. You'll make a small contribution to the channel if you do so. Well, here we are again, I guess.
Daddy! Bastard son.
Welcome to the 5th episode of Obscure and Forgotten RPGs and Action Adventures. If this is your first time watching, this is the series of videos where I play some obscure and forgotten games and try to find some hidden gems.
Bring my
if possible.
life staff.
You can check out the full playlist if you didn't already. In this video, I selected 5 specific games, like always, and we're going to talk a little bit about all of them. So let's not waste any more time with the intro.
Void Gauntlet doesn't fit.
Number 5, Legends of Aetherius. Legends of Aetherius is an action RPG that came out on Steam in 2013. This game was successfully funded on Kickstarter, but shortly after it came out on Steam, it got completely abandoned. Probably because they thought the game is going to do a lot better than it did, but the game went completely under the radar. The reception was also not that great, to say the least. A lot of negative reviews were related to the poor technical state of the game upon release, but the game itself was not all that great either. Legends of Aetherius got delisted, so you can't even buy it anymore. I was lucky enough to get the game while it was still available on Steam back in the day, and I can still boot it up. Well, lucky is probably not the best word to use. Even though you can't play this game anymore, you're not really missing that much. Legends of Aetherius had a couple of interesting ideas, and after playing it again for this video, I have to say that I don't hate this game. The gameplay is really stiff, the level design is pretty bad, and the game is literally unfinished. Those are just a couple of notable problems which the game had, but let's start from the beginning.
Amidst the chaos, I saw this settler single-handedly take on 8 Kagall warriors before the Serpentika shaman drenched the poor fool in Aethervenom. It's a miracle the settler survived.
This heap sitting there did that?
Yes. Either way, the Kagall push isn't the worst of it.
Legends of Aetherius had a co-op mode, and the general design of the gameplay feels MMO-ish. You get to make your own character in the beginning, with a pretty extensive character creation menu. The UI design reminds me a lot of MMORPGs from that time period. You can choose between 2 different factions that kinda feel the same, and you jump right in. There is a short little cutscene which doesn't tell you much. Speaking about the cutscene, the story is bare bones, so I'm not even going to talk about it because it's a waste of time. Even accepting quests feels the same like in MMORPGs, but this game felt the need to narrate every single action you do. This stops after a couple of missions, but the tutorial text never stops. even though these levels are extremely linear and you have a checklist of activities on the side.
Many gates have been placed throughout the wild spaces of Aetherius. To open a gate, stand in proximity to highlight it, and then hit the E button to open it. This process can sometimes require a special key.
It's clear to me that these people had no idea what they're doing with the level design. When there is literally no room for mistake, why do you feel the need to include heavy hand-holding features? It's beyond me. For example, this quest requires you to visit every zone on the map, just because you just walk towards the zone and you need to go back and do the same in the other zone and eventually kill something. No things to explore, a very few things to loot outside of enemy NPCs on that, and it's just a bad experience overall. The gameplay had some interesting ideas, so to break the monotony, let's talk about the positive stuff first. First of all, I think the co-op play could be very fun in this game if they actually bother to finish it. This game had an arena, PvP and PvE fights, and the ability to do quests with up to 4 players, which is pretty cool. The Nexus is your hub area, and you could do some side activities here. If you had the materials, you could build a lot of statues around this place and customize them in a couple of different ways. Then we have the crafting system, which is surprisingly pretty extensive. It reminds me a lot of Dragon Age Inquisition and Greedfall crafting system. You can make a lot of different items with a variety of different materials, assuming you have them. I spent around 20 minutes messing around with the crafting system, and I made a couple of armor pieces and a decent two-handed sword, which brings us to the combat system. Legends of Aetherius had some very stiff animations, which look outdated, even in 2013. The combat itself was not that good either, but to tell you the truth, there is something I like about it. I can't quite put my finger on it, but something about the gameplay feels pretty fun to me, I don't know. There is an OP thrust attack, which I started abusing, and the rocket skill I got was very useful. Some of these abilities feel pretty decent, but the game falls flat with the enemy types. Every single mob you can fight in the game feels the same. Although I only played a couple of hours in total and the game was obviously unfinished. I don't see how the boss fights at the end of the level will be even remotely challenging in the co-op play. The progression system feels awkward. It looks like a talent skill tree, but it's actually very simple and pretty boring in general. Even when you get these skills, you need appropriate materials to cast them, which was a pretty stupid design choice. Although when you kill enemies, you'll get showered with insane quantity of different materials. There is some light puzzle solving, but like I said before, the stupid narrator will just tell you everything.
To open the vault door of a temple, you must activate it. This is done by pulling the levers at each of the temple towers, sometimes in a special order.
No shit!
Oh, by the way, you can find this in the game, which is probably the board with Kickstarter supporters. If any of you are watching this video, well, I'm sorry you wasted your money.
This heap sitting there did that?
Number 4, Blood Rain 2 revamped.
The master, Mr. Zorinsky, would prefer that all the guests remain downstairs, madam.
The master can blow me, monkey suit.
Blood Rain 2 revamped is an action-adventure that originally came out in 2004. In 2020, a remastered version of the game called Blood Rain 2 Terminal Cut came out on Steam and GOG. Then we got Blood Rain 2 revamped in 2021 for current next-gen consoles. That's the version that I've been playing recently on my PS5. I randomly stumbled upon this game on the PlayStation Store. I never heard about it before. The remastered version got received pretty well, judging by the Steam reviews at least. But after playing the game for a while, I'm pretty sure that very positive rating on Steam is probably just because of nostalgia.
Alright, thanks for the lesson, bitch.
Blood Rain 2 is not an awful game, and the gameplay has some very nice attention to detail. It's very brutal and gory, up to the point where you can get this video demonetized. There is a ton of blood in all fights, and you can cut your enemies in many different ways.
Feeding time.
Blood Rain 2 is labeled as a hack and slash game, but I would actually disagree. The majority of important fights in the game are based around the gimmicky mechanic. The gameplay is very stiff and unbalanced, and the main skills you get from the very beginning allow you to cheese the entire game, basically. And it seems like the game actually encourages this playstyle, which is pretty awkward. It definitely has its fun moments, but there are some big problems with the core gameplay mechanics, which makes the game really frustrating. But first of all, the story. Do you know what's worse than blood-sucking vampires? Nazi blood-sucking vampires. Yeah, I'm serious.
But I trust she died painfully, like the rest of her family.
You Nazi asshole!
You play as a vampire called Rain, and the story picks up where the last game ended, apparently. Rain wants to kill her vampire dad, Kagan, who doesn't even recognize her. I thought the whole story of the game was going to be related to Rain trying to kill Kagan, but surprisingly, he dies in this initial cutscene. Rain then spends 60 years trying to kill all of his children, her half-brothers and sisters. Yeah, if she needs more than 60 years to kill them all, we can safely assume that Kagan is not only a blood addict.
Never mind, I'm terrible with names.
The writing and the dialogue ranges from just okay to I don't have a clue what the fuck they're talking about.
Oh, you see, we like a big bang. Like a big surprise. True. You big surprise, Vicky. It's alright. Wanna play on our side, maybe?
Rain has a lot of cheesy one-liners and she acts like a generic superhero, with the vampire theme on top of that, of course.
Yeah, kinda stings, huh?
There are two types of cutscenes in the game, pre-rendered and in-game engine cutscenes. The in-game cutscenes look appropriate for the original age of the game, while pre-rendered cutscenes look way better. Especially this one shortly after the beginning of the game. I'm not sure, but it seems like some of these cutscenes were improved in the remastered version because this looks pretty damn good for a 2004 game. Although you're mostly going to watch very outdated in-game cutscenes. That being said, I think most of the cutscenes were entertaining and the story is pretty weird but unique in a way. Overall, Blood Rain 2 feels like a B vampire movie when it comes to the story. B stands for badass vampire bitch, of course.
Oh my god, you're so stupid.
So suck about the gameplay? Sorry, what about the gameplay? The cheesy nature of the game really got to my head.
That's how I like it, honey.
The combat system doesn't leave good first impressions. You have a slash and kicking attack, which you'll be using for the entire game, basically. But compared to the feed button that you also get right away, everything else feels a lot weaker. Feeding regenerates your health and you can instantly perform this kill. That's not only what's instant, you can basically kill your enemies instantly as well. Boss-like NPCs are immune to this, but all regular enemies can be killed while feeding. Except the enemies that carry melee weapons, although you can easily get rid of the weapon with a kick attack. It feels very unbalanced, which is a shame because Rain's arsenal is pretty decent. You get a chain, a gun with a couple of firing modes, a couple of different vampire powers, and some other situational abilities. Yeeting enemies with a chain is almost equally broken as feeding, and this skill is essential in a lot of situations. I mentioned a gimmicky mechanic before, and this is exactly what I meant. The game uses this mechanic for boss fights and solving quote-unquote puzzles. It's very overused and gimmicky, which is a shame because it could have been way more interesting. Tossing enemies on sharp objects is always very fun and there are no restrictions while using this mechanic. Putting that aside, the amount of different animations to butcher your enemies is very impressive.
I need help over here.
It seems like 90% of the development effort was invested into this particular aspect of the game. It's easily the best thing about the gameplay. It's a shame because the gameplay feels very stiff and unbalanced. One of the powers you get makes you completely immune to damage and you can just button mash and win. It's pretty stupid. To make things even worse, there are platforming segments and I almost quit the game because of this. The controls are pretty unresponsive when you climb and jump on things. I never felt like I'm in complete control of my character. If you don't release the thumbstick when you jump, Rain will just jump again without you pressing anything. It doesn't make a lot of sense. On top of that, the camera can be your main enemy on some levels, so you want to see what's going on above you or in tight areas. Now here's the thing. I really wanted to love this game because my favorite superhero movie is Blade 1 and 2.
Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be?
Mister?
BloodRayne seems to be inspired a little bit by those movies, but I would say it's mostly inspired by Matrix. I'm not surprised at all, considering the year it came out. The game left a bad taste in my mouth, no pun intended, believe it or not.
Feeding time.
I wouldn't recommend trying out this game, although the price is very low. BloodRayne 2 didn't age all that well when it comes to the gameplay mechanics, although the visuals in the remaster are solid for a 2004 game. But if you plan to get any of these games, you can support the channel by using my GOG links. Don't buy this game though.
Alright, thanks for the lesson, bitch.
Number 3.
Wow.
The Bard's Tale.
Now keep your arms and legs inside the vessel at all times.
Yeah, the
You are
Bard's Tale was
pregnant,
fucked
are you?
up.
No, of course you're not.
The Bard's Tale is an action RPG, originally released in 2004. Technically, this game had nothing to do with the original The Bard's Tale game from 1985. It was not a remaster or a remake because the studio behind the game don't own the rights for the original IP. Despite that, The Bard's Tale had some references to the original game, which was a pretty ballsy move.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it's all a big coincidence.
Especially considering that the original IP is owned by EA. Anyway, in 2020, remastered and re-snarkled version of the game released on pretty much all platforms. I always wanted to try this game out because it looked interesting and I love isometric action RPGs. Mainly because I love the gameplay loop, which those games usually provide, but the gameplay in The Bard's Tale is not exactly like that. Not at all actually.
Not
This is
at
not
all.
a Diablo-like action RPG by any means. I would say it plays more like an action adventure with some RPG elements on top of it. It's a pretty linear game as well. However, The Bard's Tale is a very charming and humorous game. Up to the point where I would recommend it just because of the story and the humor.
Prepare to die. I am Ogan, the chosen one. Nothing will stop me from my quest to save the princess and drive the evil from this land. Have at you.
The characters are goofy and downright ridiculous at times, and there are a lot of little cutscenes and fun interactions. You play as a bard, obviously, and right from the first cutscene, you should get a good idea of what kind of a game this is. This continues throughout the whole game, it's very entertaining. You never get to hear the actual name of the protagonist, you're just a generic hero. But the story has a clever way of using that to its advantage. The game is completely narrated as well, and like I said before, I always think that's a bad idea. Ironically, the bard hates the narrator as well, and the game breaks the fourth wall a couple of times.
Wait, am I reading that correctly? This can't be right.
You'd be surprised. I find all kinds of things inside these beasties. Did I ever tell you about the time I killed this rat and out popped an entire chest?
Well, I'm just going to skip those passages in the future.
What? That's a major source of income. You cheap, good-for-nothing horses.
And so the bard continued on his journey.
So I don't hate this feature in the Bard's Tale, even though it can still get annoying, especially when you're just trying to browse the menu. The main story is essentially just about the princess who needs to be saved, and the game offers you an interesting choice when it's all said and done. Speaking about choices, in the majority of dialogues, you can select a good or a bad option,
Especially when you're trying to surf the menu. That was actually quite funny. Very seldom do I think something's funny, but that was funny. That was funny.
But this doesn't seem to affect the gameplay in a major way, although different reactions you get are very entertaining. I'm not a huge fan of how the game plays. The combat is very simplistic, but you'll get a couple of useful spells, which are mostly related to summoning or buffs. You'll get to allocate RPG stats in the beginning and when you level up, and there is stuff to loot, of course. The melee combat feels very stiff, especially because of the stagger mechanic. Almost all melee hits you deal or receive will stagger the character, which is very annoying. You get buttons for block and jump, and that's pretty much it. The spells you get are pretty much essential because the melee combat feels more like a utility than anything else. As you progress through the game and when you gain more levels, the gameplay gets a bit better, but I wouldn't recommend getting this game if you expect to find a good combat system. To be honest, the majority of fights in the game feel completely pointless, especially the random encounters on the map. Speaking about maps, they are pretty generic and not so fun to explore. However, I would recommend buying this game if you want to get a good laugh.
Pull that one!
Pull that one.
No, not that one!
The gameplay definitely didn't age all that well, but it's still a pretty entertaining game because of the story and the humor. The remastered version of the game is available on pretty much all gaming platforms nowadays. Number 2. Dungeon Siege 3.
Automatons, here. Now, it will not thicken, yes?
Dungeon Siege 3 is an action RPG that came out in 2011. It was developed by a well-beloved RPG studio, Obsidian Entertainment. However, I'm pretty sure that Obsidian wants you to forget this game because it wasn't received with open arms. Even though the game itself was pretty decent overall, it had very little resemblance to the classic Dungeon Siege series. At least that's what the fans of this series think. I personally didn't play Dungeon Siege games. I definitely want to play them and possibly include them in one of these future videos. Dungeon Siege 3 plays like many similar games from this time period, and that's not a compliment. The gameplay is very straightforward and pretty simple to understand, with not a lot of depth, especially for an RPG. It's more like a linear action-adventure with some light RPG elements. I feel like I'm saying that a lot when it comes to games from this time period. I covered Sacred 3 in the previous video, and that game basically suffered from the same issues. You get a sequel that's pretty decent on its own, but compared to the previous entries in the series, it's a shadow of its former self. For some reason, the marketing team behind these games thought it was a good idea to streamline the game in order to make it more accessible and console-friendly, I guess. Which is fine, but when you overdo it, it's not surprising that people will react like this. Putting that aside, there is a lot to like about this game, believe it or not. Let's start with the visuals and the setting first. I absolutely love how this game looks. It has a couple of different visual themes that blend together very well.
Yeah.
The fantasy setting is prominent throughout the entire games that blend together very well. The fantasy setting is prominent throughout the entire game. Then the second part of the game introduces some steampunk elements, which was a nice and unexpected change. You're going to explore some generic woods in the beginning and do some dungeon crawling. But all of these places are pleasant to look at, and the visual variety is pretty good in general. The color palette in the first part of the game reminded me a lot of Dragon Age Origins, probably because of the brownish filter. Despite that, the color palette is very vibrant, and I always enjoyed this semi-realistic / cartoony art style. I had 0 frame drops from playing this game on my mediocre PC. You can only tell the age of this game in dialogues when you get to see these characters up close. The resolution of textures is obviously very low for today's standards, but the faces are still okay, I guess. It didn't affect my enjoyment of the story, or the game in general.
What the f*** is that?
And speaking about the story, let's talk about it for a little bit. The story of Dungeon Siege 3 takes place 150 years after the events of previous games. You can choose between 4 different characters, and the story will be slightly different depending on your choice. All of these playable characters are important for the main story, so you're going to meet all of them, regardless of whom you chose. There are only slight variations in dialogue. It's not a huge deal, but it's a nice touch, which gives the story a little bit more depth.
Would you judge me so quickly on account of my blood? Not every Lascansi woman is a devious witch, scheming to enchant a man's heart.
I played with Lucas because he's the only character that focuses entirely on melee combat. Lucas is a member of 10th Legion, and this faction is essential for the main story. The 10th Legion has almost been completely wiped out, and you need to rebuild that by doing various quests in the game. I like the dialogue and some characters in this game, although I found the plot a little bit confusing at times.
Me too.
I don't want to spoil the story here, but the story comes down to killing a mutant god at the end. The writing is decent at best. It's a little bit rough at times, and Obsidian's other games are definitely stronger on this field.
Suspicion is an ugly trait in a man, dearest. Luckily, you needn't trust me to see the profit in my offer.
You're going to have some dialogue choices here and there, which doesn't seem to affect the game in any major way, and sometimes it can be hard to tell which option will get you out of the dialogue. which can be annoying at times, but it's not bad. I enjoy the story for what it is, even though it kinda lost me in some parts. Oh yeah, pretty much all female characters in this game are supermodels, and I ain't complaining. So what about the gameplay? Well, I'm glad you asked. To circle back to my original point of discussion, the game plays like an action-adventure with some light RPG elements. A decent action-adventure which offers you some nice variety of playstyles between these 4 characters. All of these characters get 2 different weapon types, 3 active abilities for these weapons, and some special attacks. Lucas has a sword and a shield for single target damage and 2-handed sword for splash AoE damage. I try to use the 2-handed sword for most of my time with the game, but there will be situations where it's better to switch to sword and board for some quick damage. It also depends on the gear you manage to find and the stats, they are definitely important. The progression is very linear and it doesn't give you a lot of options to build your character. The majority of characters are going to end up playing the same, with some slight variations, so the replay value is not very high.
Your skill has increased.
Unless you want to replay the game with a completely different character or in co-op modes, which I couldn't get working on my PC, unfortunately. If you play in single player mode, you will get the rest of the playable characters as followers, but you can only get one of them in the party. You can fully customize their gear and abilities as well, which is nice but not very impressive since the progression system itself is not very fun in general.
Active.
And the follower AI can be very bad at times, especially in boss fights. Speaking of which, the boss fights are okay, but they highlight the biggest problems with the combat system. The melee combat with Lucas can feel very stiff, mostly because of the animation lag. Once you start casting an ability, there is no way to cancel it, which just makes the combat more clunky than it should be and unresponsive. I can count on my one hand all the RPGs and action adventures which do the animation lag properly without feeling clunky and unresponsive, and Dungeon Siege 3 is definitely not one of them. Besides that, the combat feels okay, but yeah, it's definitely more clunky than it should be. Some boss fights have downright bad design, like this one for example, that almost made me quit the whole game. Dungeon Siege 3 reuses a lot of regular elite enemies as boss fights, they only boost their health and sometimes they have an extra attack. It feels cheap and very annoying sometimes. I mean, all games do this to some extent, but it's very overdone in this game. Overall, the combat takes some time to get used to and the camera is a little bit annoying as well. The level design is very simple and linear and it has some very stupid moments, backtracking and no in-game map for some fucking reason. Okay, check this out, you can clearly go straight and just jump here and activate the lever or the switch or whatever and open the gate, right? But the game makes you go all the way around and activate the damn switch because, yeah, that makes sense. But the game makes this up with some great looking environments, I guess. To sum it up, I would actually recommend getting this game, but you need to know what to expect. Just like I said for Sacred 3, it's a solid action adventure overall, especially if you can get the co-op working. Even in single player mode, it's pretty fun to beat the campaign and I think I'm going to replay it with some other characters in the future. Number 1. Sudeki.
Regretfully, your lives will be terminated immediately. Thank you for your cooperation, and have a good day. Kren Systems, making life better.
Well, it's polite, if nothing else.
Sudeki is an action RPG, originally released in 2004 on Xbox and later on PC. A lot of people recommended this game in previous videos, and I finally decided to check it out. And boy, I was glad I did, because this game is the definition of a hidden gem, if you ask me.
Sir, we don't have a clue.
If Fable was a JRPG, that's how people describe this game, and I guess there is some truth to that. The release of Fable could also be one of the reasons why this game got overlooked, because they both came out in 2004. Anyway, Sudeki didn't age all that well when it comes to the visuals. It's not an ugly game, the art style still kinda holds up if you can ignore the low resolution textures. Even on 4K and max details, this is the best you're going to get, and I'm totally fine with that. Different cities and areas have a very unique look, which makes the visuals really nice in general. I only had one specific issue with the performance of the game. My whole PC would start stuttering like crazy for a couple of seconds, usually when I open up the menu. It was not very frequent, and everything besides that were great. Sudeki has a very light tone when it comes to the story, although there are some serious moments here and there. You start the game with a character named Tal, and not long after the beginning you're going to get more characters in your party. So yeah, Sudeki is a party-based action RPG. But some main quests in the game will limit your party to certain characters, so you won't get to control all of them all the time. Tal and Ailish are probably the most essential characters, I guess, although all party members have a unique background, unique place in the story, and different gameplay benefits.
I agree. It's a soldier's job to march. Scientists are supposed to save energy.
The game is filled with in-game cutscenes, and it tries its best to be a storytelling RPG, but it doesn't lack when it comes to the gameplay as well. The main story is based around 3 unique crystals that you need to retrieve from 3 world locations. The capital city, Lumnia, requires those crystals for defense, and one of the 4 main characters knows how to use them. Even though the game doesn't have a crazy amount of different locations, all of them are very unique and different, which makes the exploration really nice. Although the exploration itself is linear, but in a good way. The level design is simple for the most part, and sometimes it's based around specific abilities of these main characters. Tal has the ability to move heavy objects, Ailish can reveal hidden items, Eskel has a jetpack, and Buki can climb with her claws on specific walls. The game takes in consideration all of those unique abilities when you need to do some specific puzzles, but it's not so frequent. I didn't find this aspect of the game boring, like in some other action adventures and RPGs. These 4 characters are all unique in a way, and the game straight up tells you this. The god Tetsu will occasionally speak with them individually and bless them with unique skills and new armor. I honestly didn't expect to like the story that much. However, I ended up loving it at the end. All main characters are pretty memorable and interesting, and the game tries its best to give them a proper place in the story. The story has a decent amount of depth and lore, and the writing is good. I enjoyed the majority of dialogue throughout the game.
The portal system, or Shadow Nexus, was made centuries ago, before the time of separation. It is how we anthropomorphs arrived here.
At least when it comes to the main story, everything else is usually very goofy and kinda generic. I won't spoil the main story, but I think the plot twist is done very well. The voice acting ranges from pretty good to pretty bad, depending on the character.
I was beginning to enjoy a little female company.
This is business, Tal, not pleasure.
Now, Transcentia is through the mountains to the north. Let's get going.
But it's good enough, and it can be very charming sometimes. When it comes to the gameplay, Sudeki has an action combat system with the ability to pause the game. This is the only method to use character-specific abilities, and most of them you'll have to aim, which can feel pretty clumsy because of the camera. You can only turn your camera horizontally for some freaking reason, and there will be a lot of situations where you can't even turn your camera when it collides with objects at certain angles. Fortunately, the combat is always done in specific zones, which are more open and easy to recognize, but the camera can still be very annoying. The abilities these characters can use are actually very fun and useful. A couple of characters play exclusively in first-person mode, so the game essentially turns into FPS. You can seamlessly switch between characters with the press of a button, and the AI will control the rest of them. Even though the abilities are fun to use, it can get boring to always wait for this long-ass animation to finish, before the character finishes casting the ability. I guess that a bunch of other JRPGs have the same design philosophy, which I'm not a huge fan of. Melee characters like Tal and Buki have a combo system, and you can chain up to 3 attacks. If you manage to perform a full combo without getting interrupted, you'll deal a lot more damage and knock down most enemies. I think the melee combat is solid, but it would be a lot better if the camera was not so janky. The boss fights are okay for a 2004 game, but they're not that hard at all. If you focus on a melee character, it will be harder compared to ranged characters. Like I said before, sometimes the game will make you play with certain characters because of the story, and it's usually because there is a certain puzzle you need to solve with unique character abilities. The enemy types are pretty cool. Overall, I enjoyed the gameplay in Sudeki, despite all the issues I mentioned. It's a fun little game that should take you around 10 to 15 hours to complete. It's a real hidden gem, and a lot of people who played it would agree.
I would say so, yep.
previously on Hidden Gems or Trash.
This is business, Tal, not pleasure.
So, suck about the gameplay? Sorry, what about the gameplay? The cheesy nature of the game really got to my head.
That's how I like it, honey.
Oh yeah, pretty much all female characters in this game are supermodels, and I ain't complaining.
Would you judge me so quickly?
Your skill has increased.
Alright, thanks for the lesson, bitch.
Well, yet another episode of Hidden Gems or Trash.
What the f*** is that?
This is the series of videos where I play some obscure RPGs and action adventures. You can check out the full playlist if you missed previous videos, and I just want to thank you for all the suggestions in the comments about games that I could include in this series. You guys have been extremely helpful, and feel free to continue suggesting games. The list of games I want to cover constantly gets bigger because of you. Anyway, let's not waste any more time on the intro and get right into it. Number 5. Warlander.
Nothing can stop the harvest of this world.
Warlander is an action-adventure with roguelike elements, released in 2020. If you're one of the OG subscribers of this channel, you might remember some videos I did for this game back in 2019. I was very invested into Warlander back then, especially because the development studio was very close to where I live. So I had a chance to visit the studio, do some interviews with the creative director, and even test the alpha version of the game. It's kinda funny because it feels like an eternity ago, and back then I only had around 13k subscribers. The people from Clock Drive Games were very friendly, and I had a lot of fun while doing this. Here's a little fun fact for you. Goran Rajcic, the creative director for this game, was also the director for Genesis Rising: The Universal Crusades. Mandalore Gaming recently did a review for this game on his channel. I had no idea about this until I watched that video. Anyway, the whole premise of Warlander was very cool and unique, but I think they made a crucial mistake, which might be one of the major reasons why this game failed. From the very beginning, this was supposed to be a linear action adventure with some interesting action combat mechanics. However, they decided to completely change the whole genre of the game basically, very late in the development. They replaced the linear progression with roguelike elements. Which kinda made sense because this genre of games was starting to get really popular, and it would give the game a strong replay value, on paper at least. However, the initial reception for this game was not great, and around 7 months after the game released, it got delisted on Steam. You can't buy it nowadays. Now, I understand that linear action adventures are not exactly the most popular games nowadays, but I'm still convinced that this game would do a lot better if they just kept the original idea, especially because the gameplay was pretty fun and unique, even though it did require a lot more polish. So let's finally talk about the game itself. Warlander follows the story of a guy named Bruce and a sword named Ferguson. Yeah, the sword you use is an actual character, and it communicates with Bruce throughout the game.
Who's that? Show yourself.
In the intro cutscene, you learn that Bruce has received some amazing powers upon death, and he gets resurrected as a servant of the forest. Bruce seeks vengeance, and Ferguson is there to guide him. In the release version of the game, the story is spoon-fed to the player at certain progression points. Speaking of points, if you ever played a roguelike game, you'll know exactly how Warlander works. You get a branching tree of levels, and you choose where to go next. It's pretty basic roguelike philosophy, and it was a bit boring if you ask me. I don't know if that's because I played the early build of the game, and I know it was supposed to be a linear action adventure, but roguelike elements in this game felt very tacked on and out of place. The gameplay was supposed to be the main selling point of Warlander. The sword fighting requires to be precise with your attacks, and there is an extremely satisfying mutilation system. You can cut all body parts of enemies, and it feels great when it happens. What doesn't feel so great are the controls. I think this is one of the biggest problems with the gameplay in Warlander, and one of the main reasons why it got mixed reviews. The controls feel very sluggish, and there is an obvious input lag, which just makes the experience a lot worse. Moving Bruce around feels like you're moving a tank, especially when you try to strafe. As soon as you press A or D, Bruce will stop for a second before he decides to move in that direction. It totally breaks the flow of movement. On top of that, the game feels very janky in some specific combat situations. The camera won't follow Bruce when the ragdoll effect happens, the execution mechanic turns your camera abruptly, and there are some similar, specific situations where your camera is not working great. They obviously needed more time to polish the controls, the camera, and the game in general, but none of these problems were unfixable. If you could ignore those issues and when you get the hang of it, the combat gets very satisfying. I think they did a great job with the core mechanics. Aiming your hits was the most important thing in the game. Certain enemies will have armor protection and you need to aim at naked body parts. Well, that came out wrong. You had horizontal and vertical attacks and aiming is very precise and responsive, until the camera gets in the way sometimes. The game definitely had a specific learning curve and I'm all up for that. It didn't feel like anything I played before and I can appreciate that. The hits were very precise and when you get the hang of the basic controls and aiming, the action felt very satisfying. Cutting off limbs in this game never got boring. Warlander had a decent amount of different enemy types, which you have to fight in a specific way and use unique abilities that Bruce can acquire. Speaking of which, when you get at certain points on the roguelike map, you will get to improve your skills. Cutting off limbs is not only a visual gimmick, this is actually the way you get resources you need for improving skills. It's a pretty cool idea. As for the other gameplay features, you'll get a slight character improvements in roguelike style. And when you die, you have to start all over again, because that's essentially how roguelike games work. The boss fights are a hit and miss, and they can really highlight all the problems with the controls I mentioned before. However, the abilities that Bruce can use are well done, and they all feel like they have a clear purpose. Another major problem with the game was the lack of content. I mean, the game was released in early access, so that was to be expected, but unfortunately, we're never going to see the full potential of Warlander. It's been completely abandoned and delisted on Steam, which makes me really sad actually.
Sounds about right.
Number 4. Viking, Battle for Asgard. Viking Battle for Asgard is a hack and slash action adventure, first released on last-gen consoles in 2008. 4 years after the original release, this game got a PC port in 2012. That's the version that I've been playing, and I can tell you right away that this is a very lazy PC port. The game is capped on 30 FPS on PC for some fucking reason. Although if you can accept that, the frame rate never drops below 30 FPS mark. I ran the game on 4K with no issues, so that's something I guess. On the other side, Viking Battle for Asgard is very ambitious with all the NPCs he tries to put on the screen at once. Even in those sweaty situations, the FPS stays at 30. But the frame rate is not the only reason why this PC port is very bad. The game tells you in the beginning that you should use a controller, and of course I totally ignored that and played with mouse and keyboard. I actually tried to use my PS5 controller, but the game just doesn't recognize it. It requires an Xbox controller. Since I currently don't have one, I had to play with mouse and keyboard, and it only made my experience worse. However, the gameplay can be fun in this game for a while, but let's start from the beginning. Viking Battle for Asgard has a Norse mythology setting, surprise surprise. A very generic Norse setting with very little story elements. You play as a Viking called Skyrim, and your mission is to stop the goddess Hel and her army. There are a couple of cutscenes after you complete a map, and there are 3 maps in total, so the story is not exactly deep. The cutscenes are okay, and you will also talk to a couple of NPCs here and there. And almost all of those NPCs look the same, by the way. I honestly didn't care that much about the story in this game. The gameplay on the other hand is also not very good, but it's not bad either. This is another game on the list where cutting limbs of enemies is major part of the combat. Skyrim doesn't have a huge arsenal of weapons or skills, but the core of the combat is solid, although very clunky and shallow. The gameplay reminds me of Shadow of Mordor, in a way. The idea for it, at least. You get a couple of simple attacks that you can combine, a block with a timed dodge, and a very limited amount of combos you can learn by spending currency you obtained throughout the game. You can definitely have some fun with this combat system, but it gets very old very fast. I think the biggest problem with the combat is the balancing and the lack of enemy types. Fighting a couple of enemies at once is very easy, and you almost can't die if you just spam your combos. However, fighting a large group of enemies is way harder, if not impossible. The combos you can learn can totally trivialize the fights, but you also have to spend your resource in order to use stronger combos. The resource regenerates by striking or killing enemies, I'm not entirely sure, it's actually quite forgiving. There is a finishing move that you can perform which makes you invincible, and this is when Skyrim starts chopping enemies in half, beheading them or something similar to that. It's very cool when it happens, but like I said, it quickly gets very repetitive. I don't think the repetition in combat is bad, but in order for action combat to remain fresh, you need more unique enemy types and at least some customization and character progression. Unfortunately, the customization is non-existing in this game, and character progression is very shallow, with just a couple of combos you can learn. Most of the time you can totally ignore those new combos, because you can kill enemies with the most basic attacks. You can't see their health for some reason, and since this is a 2008 action game, it has a lot of quick time events. Ah yeah, the golden age of quick time events, we meet again. This game requires you to spam a single button like crazy for the most mundane activities you can do in a game. Opening a chest or a cage, spam the button. Wanna use the fast travel point, spam the button. And of course, some enemies have QTE sequences in combat where you need to, you guessed it, spam the button. It's totally ridiculous and I hate it with a passion. Speaking of activities, you're going to spend 90% of your time rescuing Vikings from a cage and eventually attack a big place of enemies. That's essentially the whole gameplay loop. I can count different enemy types on my one hand, and I would still have some fingers to spare. The hack and slash action works pretty good when you're not fighting more than a couple of enemies. That's not exactly what you wanna hear in a hack and slash game. The AoE damage is almost non-existent, which makes fighting larger groups of enemies very tedious or even impossible. Although when you get in those situations, the game usually expects you to have an army on your sides. However, there will be some specific situations where you can get yourself in a very large fight and you'll certainly die because running away is very hard. Probably because the damn game doesn't have a run button, this is all you're going to get. Surprisingly enough, there is a stealth system that turns on automatically. Skyrim will automatically crouch when enemies are close, which allows you to come from behind and kill the enemy with one hit. It works okay, but you can't exactly play the game as an assassin. This game has 3 bosses in total, if I'm not mistaken, and it even uses them as elite enemies from time to time. To be honest, I played way worse action adventures with QTEs, let's just put it that way. The time dodge is done very well, and I like the timing for it. Some of the combos are pretty cool as well. Like I said, there are 3 maps in the game in total, and all of them look very uninspiring and generic. The last map has snow, so that's something I guess. Overall, it's a very mediocre game, but I didn't hate it. Like I said, I had some fun with the gameplay, but it quickly gets old. You can finish this game in about 10 or 12 hours, depending on how you play it. I would not recommend checking this game out today, but you be the judge. Number 3. Shadows Awakening. Shadows Awakening is an isometric action RPG that came out in 2018. After playing this game for a while, I can say without a doubt that it's one of the most underrated isometric action RPGs that I ever played. I never heard about this game before until people suggested it in my previous videos. First of all, what the fuck is this name, man? It's very stupid and kinda generic. Putting that aside, Shadows Awakening has some very unique features which really caught me by surprise. This is actually a party-based action RPG. Well, kinda. You usually get to control one character in Diablo-like action RPGs, but Shadows Awakening allows you to have up to 4 characters in your party. As you progress through the game, you unlock more characters and you can choose how to build your party. Some of these characters will be locked on your playthrough, so if you want to experience everything, you'll need to do multiple playthroughs. However, you don't get to control all of the characters at once. You can instantly switch between them and use their unique abilities or even combine them. I mean, this is nothing revolutionary. A bunch of JRPGs and recent gacha games also have similar party mechanics. But still, I believe this is the first isometric action RPG that I played with this feature. Unfortunately, Shadows Awakening doesn't leave very good first impressions, which might be the reason why this game flew under the radar. It takes a while until you get a full party of characters, and the core gameplay mechanics are pretty underwhelming. But let's talk about the story first.
Jaska, your soul now resides within this demon. It will try to control you, but it is also bound to your will in ways I do not yet understand.
The story was surprisingly interesting, although a little bit all over the place. It can be very confusing, and even the characters don't know what the fuck is going on.
This is very confusing.
You get used to it.
The game starts with a mysterious person who summons you from the Shadow Realms, and by you, I mean the demon called Devourer. The hooded man tells you that you have common enemies and that you need to possess one of 3 long-dead heroes. This is where you get to choose your main character, and I first started with the warrior, but when I got the feel of the action combat, I quickly changed my mind. I really didn't like the melee combat in the beginning, so I switched to the ranged character. I started a new game and I selected the ranger class, which feels a bit better in the beginning. Anyway, this choice is important from the story perspective because each of these 3 heroes have a unique storyline. I found the story interesting overall and a lot better than I expected, especially for a Diablo-like RPG. Although some of the chapters will focus on different party members you picked up along the way, and the game just expects you to keep on with the story. It all happens very fast, which can be pretty confusing. On the bright side, there's a ton of optional dialogue that you can select, which can help you understand what's going on, but still, that's not an excuse. I just think the story could have been presented a bit better, which would make it a lot more enjoyable. The writing ranges from okay to pretty stupid sometimes. The voice acting is inconsistent, it starts out pretty good, but a lot of characters have very mediocre and sometimes bad voice acting. By the way, Troy Baker is one of the main voice actors, and to be honest, I don't think he did an amazing job with this character. Most of the time he sounds like he's delivering his lines through text-to-speech.
Wherever Mara can be found, the cauldron will be also. But she is too powerful. While she possesses the Crucible of Souls, there is no hope of recovering it, I'm afraid. You are not his quarry today. He will not risk pursuing you if it might mean losing me. Head for Temuria if there's a way to destroy the Crucible of Souls.
The whole story has a more comedic vibe, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, which certainly made the story more enjoyable for me. Now let's talk about the gameplay. Like I said, the gameplay doesn't leave good first impressions. This is another game on the list that has slight input lag, which obviously makes the gameplay less responsive. On top of that, the gameplay itself leaves a lot to be desired. It feels very clunky and floaty, especially for a Diablo-like action RPG. Controlling my character never felt smooth like in some other similar games. I mean, it's not awful and you can certainly find a lot worse examples out there, but that doesn't make the game any better. This also depends on which character you play with, because some of them feel better than others. Controlling the demon feels way more responsive because he's a lot faster. But you'll feel the same clunkiness, if that's even a word, when you start using his abilities. Speaking about the demon form, this is one of those unique features. When you switch to the demon, everything around you changes. The environment, the enemies, and puzzle solving is also affected. When you get stuck, it's usually because you'll have to do something in demon form. And like I said, you get to fight different enemy types, although for the most time they feel exactly the same, just with a different skin. You will even see enemies that your normal characters can see, but they remain frozen in time until you switch back. And what I found really cool is that you can use some of your abilities in this form, which will affect all enemies, even the frozen ones. For example, I can quickly switch to the demon and use the freeze spell, and if I switch back to my regular character, the enemy will remain frozen. That's not the only case with the demon. For example, if some of your characters have certain buffs, you can use that spell and it will be active on whatever character you switch. That's definitely one of the coolest features of this game. You can only use 3 spells at once with one character, which felt really underwhelming in the beginning. But when you get the full party
Great,
of
I'm
4,
dead.
you basically have 12 spells at your disposal.
Thank you.
It all depends on how you switch your characters and how well you use your energy resource. It takes a while to get used to, but once you get the hang of it, the gameplay becomes a lot better, compared to the beginning at least. Unfortunately, it takes a while for that to get in motion. I can see why a lot of people would quit the game before they get the full party, which is essentially where the game actually begins. That being said, I think the demon form gets very old very fast. It was very cool in the beginning, but later in the game I almost completely ignored it until I absolutely need to use it. The combat is a bit faster with the demon, but it doesn't feel that good, and some enemies are kinda annoying. A lot of bosses in the game take the advantage of the demon form, meaning that you usually have to break some barrier in the demon form until you get to damage the boss with other characters. I don't have anything bad to say about that. I like when games try to use their unique features as much as possible. Speaking of bosses, they are okay. I only hated a couple of them, like when you have to completely avoid the boss and run in circles like an idiot. The party of 4 characters make the game really flexible in boss fights and the gameplay in general, although sometimes you won't get to control all of them. And that's one of the biggest weak points of the game, because having 4 switchable characters at once is the major thing which makes the gameplay solid, despite all the issues I mentioned about the gameplay before. I made a horrible decision in the beginning by selecting the old school mode, which essentially turns off the quest marks. That's how I usually prefer my RPGs, but if the game is not designed around that philosophy, it only makes the experience a lot worse. The quests have pathetic descriptions of what you need to do, and you can run in circles a lot just because you didn't notice that you can use a lever or something. Don't ask me how I know. This could have been easily avoided if the game had the button to highlight all the interactable objects. You know, like almost every single Diablo-like RPG ever. Putting that aside, I did like the map design. The maps are not huge by any means, but they are not linear either. Combined with the nice visual style of the game and the unique Shadow Realm with the demon, Shadow's Awakening is still a pretty game to look at. Overall, I would recommend trying out this game today. It has enough unique features that you might like if you enjoy playing isometric action RPGs. Just don't expect to have an amazing character progression like in some other Diablo-like RPGs. The itemization is decent, you'll get a bunch of different loot for all characters, but it never felt that important in the game. You'll get to unlock a decent amount of different abilities for all characters, and you have some passive abilities as well. All of that is presented with a very nice UI design. I played this game on hard and it felt pretty balanced. There is a decent amount of challenge, even though some of that challenge comes from the clunky controls and mediocre action in general. Number 2. Blade of Darkness. Blade of Darkness is an action-adventure that originally came out in 2001. In 2021, we got a remastered version on Steam, and that's the version that I've been playing. I wanted to cover this game ever since it got a remastered version, I just never got around to. There is a lot to love about Blade of Darkness, even though it's obviously very outdated. The visuals are very primitive for today's standards, of course, but that doesn't bother me personally. It actually grew on me the more I played, and despite the outdated graphics, the game still manages to create an amazing atmosphere. An amazing dark atmosphere that really puts you in a certain mood. I mean, it's right there in the title. When you start the game, you get to choose between 4 different characters. They all have different weapon specialities, strengths and weaknesses. They also start the game on different maps, but eventually all of them go through the same routes. I only played the game with Turrican because he prefers two-handed weapons, just like myself. Although I could use a bow with him and the majority of weapons I found during my playthrough. This game is all about the gameplay, even though there are some cutscenes when you get to a new location, as well as at the end of the level. To be completely honest, I don't remember anything about the story, even though I did like the vibe of the cutscenes. 4 creatures are awakening from the dormancy and spreading terror and destruction. The darkness has returned, and the end is near. That's the main gist of the story, according to Wikipedia. It doesn't matter a lot because this game is all about the gameplay. Some people will say that this game is the granddad of Souls-like games, although I would disagree. Blade of Darkness can definitely be very challenging, and there are some similarities with Souls-like games, like the energy / stamina system. However, the gameplay in this game leans towards hack and slash style. At first the combat feels very odd and not so precise because of the controls and stiff animations, but if you give it a proper chance, it's not so hard to get used to. At least that was the case with my playthrough. The combat is all about different combos and unique weapon abilities. There is a decent amount of different weapons to pick up, and all of them have something unique. You have a menu with all the combos, and learning how to use them in combat is very satisfying. Although once I found something I really like, I rarely switch my tactic in combats. For example, I love this sidestep with a slash, and I used it a lot. I found a lot of unique two-handed swords, and I was always very curious about their special abilities. In order to perform these special abilities, the game requires you to be a certain level, and they usually cost a lot of energy. You will have to manage your energy resource, but it's not that aggressive like in Souls-like games. It's a lot more forgiving. If you don't spam your special ability, you won't even know it's there. The game requires you to be somewhat precise with your positioning in combats. You can't really take a ton of hits and survive, but this also depends on your defense stats. There are some armor pieces that you will find throughout your campaign, which will boost your defense stat, but this is very rare. It's not like the weapons, which can be found on each enemy and various locations. It's really enjoyable trying to learn the combos on weapons, if not a little bit clumsy. Although a lot of these combos don't seem to be worth it, especially when the combat gets really intense. When you're fighting multiple enemies at once, which will happen quite often, you don't have the time to execute a complicated combo. Maybe if you're really good at this game, but I usually stick with just a couple of simple attacks. I'm not saying that these complicated combos are not worth doing at all. If you manage to pull them off without getting attacked or killed, you'll do a ton of damage. And I always try to memorize the unique ability of each weapon I used.